everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I am delighted to welcome Jennifer Longsdorf here to help us celebrate National Bat Appreciation Month, which happens to be October. Jennifer is the program coordinator with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program at the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. So first of all, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time to be here with us to talk about and appreciate bats.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, Jennifer, I discussed this a little bit with you as we were preparing for this program, but I developed an admiration for bats and an appreciation for what they do for human beings when I had the opportunity while visiting Austin, Texas, to witness the nightly migration of thousands and thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats from underneath the Congress Avenue Bridge. It's a stunning display, and everyone should go at some point. But that's when I first developed an appreciation for bats. And I wanted to start by asking you about your bat appreciation. What made you become interested in bats and the characteristics that make them so fascinating and distinctive as mammals? And what are some of the ways that bats indeed are helpful to human beings?
So, my degrees are actually marine biology and environmental studies, not bats or wildlife specifically. So I came to love bats through a more roundabout way. I started with Mass Wildlife in October 2011, and several bat acoustic detectors had been purchased prior to me working there, but had yet to be used. So I took some courses and training, shadowed a biologist in Connecticut, reached out to my counterparts in researchers in the Northeast, and conducted some research of my own to learn as much as I could about bats. And fast forward 13 years, and I'm now the bat lead for Massachusetts.
Something took.
Yes, absolutely. Sure did. Yeah, and bats are amazing creatures that have long been misunderstood. Nearly 20%, or about a quarter of all mammal species are bats, and they're the second largest group of mammals in the world behind rodents. And contrary to popular belief, they're actually very friendly and useful creatures, and they're often considered a keystone species because they play a critical role in our ecosystem and they're vital to the health of our environment. They're really an indicator of the overall health of our ecosystem. And here in Massachusetts, all of our bats are insect eating, but in other parts of the world, there are fruit eating and nectar feeding bats, which are helpful, for plant and crop pollination, seed dispersal, and forestry growth. So bats they're truly amazing. Like the bats in our area, like I said, that are insect eating. So they're the primary predators of night flying insects. And that includes things like mosquitoes, beetles, and moths, and disease carrying insects. The one thing that really makes bats truly remarkable is that they can eat up to 1,200 mosquitoes in a single hour.
Thank you, bats.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, they have extremely fast metabolisms, and many bats can consume over half of their body weight in insects each night, and some can consume even up to their whole body weight in insects. So they're really act as an organic pest control, and they're nature's way of controlling the insect population. And so, by providing that benefit of controlling the insect populations, they're important for a wide variety of things, agriculture, forestry, and human health. They save farmers money by eating crop damaging insects. That allows farmers to use fewer pesticides, and it also saves farmers money. It makes our food safer. It increases crop yields or reduces the amount of chemicals that are released into our air and water. So they're really play a critical role in our ecosystem and in our environment. And then, there's a lot of research being conducted on bats in science, technology, and medicine. Research has led to advancements in flight and sonar capabilities, navigational aids for the blind, drone engineering, vaccine development. I mean, you can go on and on. Blood clot medications, low temperature surgery. There's so many things that bats have helped in our life. And so they truly are remarkable and amazing creatures.
And underappreciated. I know the first time I learned about the massive amount of crop-eating insects was when I was in Austin and got to witness that
Yeah.
migration. And it was an interesting story because that Congress Avenue Bridge, when it was built, it had this bat-perfect space underneath it, like this
Yep.
gap. And when they
Yep.
designed the bridge, they didn't know about that. And so when they
Right.
first found the bats were there, they were going to fill it in. But some bat conservationists said, wait a minute, no, no, no. And then they talked about, the contribution bats make to agriculture. And when,
Right.
when the
Absolutely.
general public learned about just how many crop-eating insects they were consuming and the benefits to saving money for farmers, lowering
Yep.
the amount of pesticides that they had
Oh,
to
for
use
sure.
on their crops, and that means cleaner air and cleaner water for all of us.
Yep. And cleaner food. Yep.
So they had a great PR campaign for bats as these wonderful organic pest control eating machines,
Yep,
and they were able.
absolutely.
And then, of course, it's become a great tourist attraction in
Of
Austin,
course.
Texas, as well. So it was a win-win for the bats and the humans and the city of Austin, Texas.
Yeah. Sure sounds like it. I hope to get there someday.
Well, Austin is a great place to visit for many reasons, but bats.
Regardless, right? Yeah.
But being able to watch the thousands of bats emerge at dusk is really quite stunning.
Yeah, that's what
and
I've
they're-
heard.
Yeah, and they're flying out over the river as well, so
Right.
it's really quite spectacular. Well, and of course they echolocate, and you mentioned the research which is, I read somebody who put it that they see what they're hearing, which is kind of an amazing thing to think about, but that thanks to bats, we were able then to develop, they helped with the development of sonar technologies, which is
Yep,
also
absolutely, yeah.
a great gift to human beings. So,
Absolutely.
anyway, thank you, bats. We will appreciate
Yes.
you. Well, Jennifer, how many species of bats are there? A huge number, I know, from what you said, second only to rodents in terms of the number of species. But
Yeah.
how many species are there worldwide, and how many are in Massachusetts? How many live amidst us?
So there are more than 1,400 species of bats in the world, and 9 species live in Massachusetts. So of the 9 species, 8 are protected under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. 5 of those species are state listed as endangered, and 3 as species of special concern. 2 of our 9 species are federally protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And just one last note, our 3 migratory tree bats, which are the silver-haired, eastern red, and hoary bats, they were just added to the Massachusetts Endangered Species list on August 16th of this year as species of special concern. So we only have 9 of the 1,400 species here in Massachusetts, but they definitely need our help.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And I want to talk to you a little bit about their habitat. And Maeve, as we're talking, could you put up the 2 pictures of the little brown bats in the barn? And I don't know, I think they're really cute. Others may differ, but I thought they were cute even before I knew how much they did for human
Yes.
beings. And we have 2 that Maeve will post, one of bats in a
Great.
barn and then one of bats hibernating in a cave. So could you talk a little bit about what their habitats are, where these guys live?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're definitely right. They are cute. But
And did you think that before you found out what they do for us?
yes, of
Yeah, I
course.
did too.
Yeah. If you look at a bat up close, they're much cuter than what they appear, in movies and TV shows, etc. But as for their habitat, so bats have evolved over 60 million years to survive in a variety of habitats, and they can be found in nearly every habitat type except for extreme deserts and polar regions. So bats live on all continents except Antarctica. And as for their habitats specifically, they inhabit a wide range of habitats from urban to rural locations. They can be found in places like caves, mines, barns, attics, garages, sheds, church steeples, bridges, tunnels, trees, like under rocks, in piles of wood. Really, bats are all around us.
In other words, they're incredibly adaptable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they can live and survive. I mean, there's 1,400 species in the world, and they've all adapted to live and survive everywhere except Antarctica. Um, and bat habitats, they differ between species as well as season, the summer versus the winter. For example, like in Massachusetts during the summer, big brown bats, which are the most common bat species in Massachusetts, they prefer more urban areas and they frequently roost in houses, but they can still be found in trees and mines in the summer. And then during the winter time, the big brown bat is the only bat in Massachusetts that prefers and commonly hibernates in buildings that have like a partial heat source, so they don't completely freeze. And then during the winter time, many of our bats in Massachusetts, they hibernate in natural limestone caves, abandoned mines, and old aqueducts where the humidity is high and the temperatures rarely drop below freezing. So not only do their habitats differ, among the species, they differ between the summer and winter, depending on whether they're migratory bats or if they're a hibernating species.
Yeah. So, and again, testimony to, as we were saying, the incredible adaptability of bats.
Absolutely. Yes.
And their way of finding ways to survive and thrive in so many different environments.
Yeah, and thrive is the key word there.
Yeah, which is good for us because it means they survive as a species and can continue providing the amazing services that so many of them do. And in addition to eating insects, I wanted to go back and remind people, as you talked about the pollination that a lot of bats do. I think there's 300 different kinds of fruits that bats pollinate. So anybody who loves bananas, for example, or mangoes, and I love both of those.
Mangoes is a big one, yes.
Thank a bat.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, but it's also true that, as was clear when you were describing Massachusetts bats and the number of them that are whose survival is being threatened, a lot of bat populations are in serious decline. So Jennifer, teach us about what are the factors that are threatening bats and how serious is the problem?
Yes, so worldwide, bats are faced with a variety of threats, and that it's largely the result of human activity. Humans have wiped out entire species of bats and have caused many others to become nearly extinct. So some of the threats to bats include things like habitat loss and degradation, pesticide use, like we were talking about, climate change, wind turbines, there's simple fear and ignorance, there's roost closure, overexploitation, extermination, and unregulated guano mining. Those are, some common threats to bats, but currently the number one threat to bats is white nose syndrome.
And Maeve, we have a picture of white nose syndrome. If you could post that while Jennifer teaches us more about white nose syndrome.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if I could take a minute to talk about white nose syndrome in some more detail, just to really educate your listeners about this devastating disease and fungus. So the term white nose syndrome comes from the fact that bats with this condition look like they dip their noses or their faces in powdered sugar. That white powdery substance on their noses is a fungus. And that fungus, although it's called white nose syndrome, the fungus can also be found on the bare skin of their ears and wings. And the fungus was first observed in bats hibernating in a cave near Albany, New York in 2006. Let me backtrack a little. So usually bats that hibernate over the winter, they have enough fat to last them until they emerge from hibernation in late April and early May. And then, in the springtime, obviously, there's plenty of insects to eat, so the bats can replenish their energy reserves. But at caves and mines, where there's white nose syndrome, the fungus is really aggressive and it attacks and grows on the bats while they're inactive and their body temperature is below 50 degrees. So the fungus irritates and damages the skin of the bats so much that it causes the bats to wake up and increases their metabolism. So typically when bats are hibernating, they wake up, they're not in a deep sleep hibernating straight through. They usually wake up about every 10 to 20 days, but white nose syndrome infected bats wake up from their winter torpor as often as every 3 to 4 days. So that's a much So they're waking up much more frequently.
Yeah.
And during this time, the bats can be seen flying outside in the daytime in the cold of winter in a desperate attempt to find something to eat. But obviously, there's no insects available in the dead of winter. So the hibernating bats quickly deplete their precious fat reserves, and they ultimately starve to death. So the fungus can also create like holes in their wings, which leads to dehydration and also compromises their immune systems. And so the fungus can be spread from bat to bat contact. Bats hibernate. They usually hibernate like very close to each other, like touching each other. But the fungus can also live in areas where there aren't any bats. So the fungus can survive just like on the walls of caves and things. So the bats can also pick up the fungus just from the environment. And so the introduction of the white-nosed fungus resulted in a greater than 99% mortality of bats in Massachusetts hibernacula in just the first 2 years alone.
Wow.
And the onset of white-nose syndrome in Massachusetts, or since the onset, our state's population of little brown bats has dwindled to less than 1% of what it once was.
That's a dramatic statistic.
Extremely dramatic. And it was so quick, just in the first 2 years we had this dramatic decrease. And because of the devastating mortality that has resulted from white nose syndrome, all 4 of our bat species that spend their winters in caves and mines have been listed as endangered on the Massachusetts endangered species list, like I mentioned. And this is not only a problem in Massachusetts, but white nose continues to spread rapidly across the whole U.S. and Canada, and has caused catastrophic mortality of bats that spend their winters in caves and mines. And I believe it's estimated that 6.7 million bats have died in the U.S. Since 2006 due to white nose syndrome. And so white nose syndrome, like I mentioned, is now the #1 threat to bats, and it causes mortality rates that approach 90 to 100% at some sites. And scientists predict that the once abundant and widespread little brown bat will be reduced to just 1% of its pre-white nose syndrome population by 2030.
Well, that's dramatic
extreme.
and sad, and very extreme.
Yeah.
And the fungus, I take it from what you're saying, it just continues to spread.
Yes.
And
but it continues to spread westward across the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah. Well, if we're not able to bring back bat populations, Jennifer, what are some of the consequences that we could experience?
Yeah, so bats provide ecological services by removing, enormous numbers of insects off the landscape each night. That adds up to millions of dollars of pest control value. But the worth of bats goes far beyond dollars and cents. Kind of what we were talking about earlier. If we were to lose bats, there would be large negative environmental and economic impacts because the insect populations would increase. So farmers would experience more crop damage from insects, and in turn, they'd have to spend more money on pesticides to protect their crops. And obviously, an increase in pesticide use would release more chemicals into the environment, and that could also result in human health impacts.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, if farmers chose not to increase pesticide use, for various reasons, then there would be a decrease in local food production because of the damage the crop damage from the insects, which would therefore drive up food costs.
Right.
So
it's kind of a chain reaction, and we have to understand the impact of bats and the importance of conserving them. You have to think holistically and systemically. One thing impacts other things that impact other things. And as you said, bats are a keystone species, so they're pivotal to kind of creating and keeping they're a marker of a healthy environment. If we lose them, that means that there are other problems in the environment that we should be attending to. So
Right. It'd be a chain reaction if we were to lose bats, for sure.
Well, bats have an image problem, Jennifer, that we hope to correct. And so let's go through, there's a lot of misconceptions about bats out there. Let's go through some of them, and you can tell us, the truth about bats. So are bats blind? That's one misconception, that they're blind.
Definitely misconception. So many bats have very small eyes and sensitive vision, but bats can see as well as most other mammals, and some bats can even see up to 3 times better than humans.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll lay that misconception to rest.
Yes.
Now, another big conception is that all bats have rabies.
Another myth. So any mammal can contract rabies, but less than half of 1% of bats has rabies, which is a much lower rate of incidence than most other mammals. And bats that do contract rabies are unlikely to come into contact with humans, and they die fairly quickly from the virus because they're so small. And also, just add that rabies in bats is singular, which means that one bat in a colony can be infected while the rest of the bats are healthy. So, for comparison purposes, far more bats or far more people die from things like dog attacks, bee stings, lightning strikes, and random household accidents than they do from rabies from bats.
Okay, good to put that myth to rest then. It's really rare. and there's a lot of other things to be more frightened of.
Absolutely.
So, all right, now, do bats get tangled in your hair?
No. So bats are not interested in human hair, and they do not build nests. A lot of people think they get tangled in your hair because they build nests like a bird.
Yeah.
But they don't build nests. So as you had mentioned about the bat echolocation, so bat echolocation is highly sophisticated, and it enables bats to detect obstacles as fine as a strand of human hair. So bats can very easily avoid your head, and their echolocation makes them extremely agile. So usually if a bat gets close to a human, it's because there are swarms of insects around them, and as we all know, insects are attracted to humans. So bats are not interested in humans. They are not get tangled in your hair.
They're more interested in the insects that might be around your head. Absolutely.
Yes. They're just trying to feed themselves.
And then they'll go off.
Right.
So, all right. So, do bats attack humans?
No. Similar to the last, statement, bats do not attack people. They're not purposely aggressive. Bats are actually afraid of humans, and they avoid us as best that they can.
All right. Now, here's an interesting one, but it's Halloween, so we should especially dispel this. Do bats suck blood?
Yes. So, like I mentioned before, most of the 1,400 bat species in the world are insect eaters, and they help to get rid of blood-sucking mosquitoes. Only 3 of the more than 1,400 species in the world are vampire bats, and vampire bats live in Mexico, Central America, and South America, and they lick blood from non-human animals. So, contrary to popular belief, they do not suck blood, but instead they make a small incision and they lap the blood up, which doesn't clot because of anticoagulants in the bat saliva. And the vampire bats, they're usually, making an incision on things like cattle. So not in humans.
Yeah. Do you happen to know if bats eat greenhead flies?
I'm sure they would go after them, various species. I don't know for certain. Yeah.
Well, if they do, thank you very much, bat.
Yeah.
Because they're the bane of beaches and
Oh, for sure. I know that.
during their season. And talk about bloodsuckers. Yeah. Okay, now that's a greenhead fly. So they probably, I suspect they do eat them. So
right.
Now another misconception, I believe, people think of bats as dirty. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, bats are actually really clean, and they groom themselves regularly, just like cats do, and some bats even groom each other.
Interesting.
They're definitely not dirty.
Okay. And some people, there's a myth out there that bats are really just flying mice.
Yes, I've heard that a lot. So bats are not rodents. Bats are classified as their own unique order of mammals called Chiroptera, which in Greek translates to hand wing. So bats are more closely related to humans than they are to mice. Also, bats do not nest, chew, or claw their way into a structure like mice do. And, lastly, most mice and other rodents, they only live for 1 to 2 or so years. But bats can live for much longer. You know, there's one little brown bat that's known to have lived in the wild for 33 years, I believe. And then there's one Brandt's myotis, a different species from Siberia, that lived for at least 41 years in the wild. So they live much, much longer than rodents do.
Well, with that
So they're,
kind of lifespan, just imagine all the insects they've consumed.
oh,
It must be
exactly. One guy
millions.
alone. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for laying those myths to rest and
Of course.
ridding us of some of these misconceptions. So, what's the moral of this story?
Yeah. The moral of the story is don't let myths play on your fears. You know, although bats can be mysterious, they're actually intelligent, cute, and friendly animals once you really get to know them.
Yeah. Well, now that we've established that, Jennifer, what can we do to help conserve bats?
So bats clearly need our help. One way that the public can help is to simply be a citizen scientist and spread the word about reporting colonies of 10 or more bats to mass wildlife. People can also help dispel myths and fears about bats, similar to like we just did, and to help others learn why bats are actually fascinating and beneficial. The public can also protect natural habitats for bats. So if you have old, dead, or dying trees on your property, leave them standing as a potential roost site for bats, if it's safe to do so. And you can also like protect streams and wetlands around your property. And then another big one is if you know, obviously bats get into people's homes, you know, whether they like it or not. But if you must exclude or evict bats from your home, it just ensure the process is safe and humane by following Mass Wildlife's recommendations, which can be found in our homeowner's guide to bats. Another big one that we've talked about a lot. People can reduce pesticide use to ensure bats have a reliable and safe food source. Let's see, people can also create a bat-friendly landscape in their backyard. You do this by, you know, adding water features such as a pond, and also planting night-blooming flowers that will attract
Yes.
insects.
That's when they come out to hunt. So,
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So you can also, you know, avoid disturbing bats by staying out of caves and mines where bats are hibernating during the winter. And lastly, install a bat house to provide an alternative roost site and a secure home for bats.
And Maeve, could you post? We have a picture of a bat house that we'll post. And I know people do used to work at Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary, and they had a nice big bat house they built there
Yeah.
for the bats. But they're, as you can see from the picture, they're not that complicated. They don't
Right,
have
exactly.
elevators, you know.
They can be, you know, there are definitely like all sorts of examples of bat houses. So some are much more simpler and some are more complex. But, you know, if you'd like to build one, just find one that suits your needs or your skill set or budget, whatever it may be, or just buy a pre-assembled one.
That's right.
So-
You can do that as well, and just put it up in your backyard. And
Exactly. There are
then
many
they will
options.
come and eat the mosquitoes
Yes.
and take care of any insect problems that you have. So,
Right,
and-
exactly.
And just to give people the website, it's www.massgov/bats. And you'll find lots of information at that site, including how to build a bat house, including I think it was
Yep,
a
the
handbook,
Homeowner's Guide
the
to
Homeowner's
Bats.
Guide to Bats, which
Yes.
has information on it should you have a bat and come inside your house on how to safely
Right.
remove
Right,
it. So, well,
Yes.
Jennifer, I can't thank you enough. They are really, truly amazing animals.
Yes, they certainly are.
And I didn't know how long some of them can live, but that is a really good career, 30 plus years for some of them.
Right.
Providing these
Or more.
or more. That's right. Of providing an array of ecological services to the
Yes.
planet and the ways that we human beings benefit from them. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the morning show and
Great.
to educate us about bats. It's been really fun and a great learning experience to
course.
talk to you.
Thank you for having me. Any opportunity I can get to, educate the public on why bats are truly important is,
Well,
a win in my book. So
you do an excellent job of it. Thank you for that.
thank you very much.
That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Until then, everybody, please be well. Bye now.